And there we are. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. Welcome to RV Life Pro product training. Today, we're going to start out specifically talking about, there we go, understanding locked dates in RV Life Trip Wizard. So if that's a topic of interest to you, hang on. We're also going to cover, we're going to talk about the default settings. We haven't really covered those in a while, as particularly as they relate to the trip settings and how they feed the default settings, things like that. We're just going to go touch on those again, kind of remind everybody where they are. We'll also have a brief discussion on the low clearance signs. I had a support ticket this week that reminded me that even though we talk about it often, there's still some things that folks see when they see those warning signs that concerns them. So we'll talk about that, and we'll briefly cover searching for things again, as that's become just something that needs another reminder as well. So without further ado, let me turn off this banner here real quick, and we are going to dive into the locked dates feature and understanding that. Let me get to that, share that window first and get the screen that I want. Okay, so the locked dates is an interesting feature. It was really heavily requested when it first came out. I was certainly not on the fan. How do I say this? I didn't really see the need for it. I mean, it the way Trip Wizard plans your trips and you have to add a number of nights to fill the gaps, it all made sense to me. But now having seen it implemented and seeing it used, it's actually pretty darn cool. And it works extremely well. There is a confusion point about choosing and picking the dates in the lock date. So we're going to try to cover that and make that uh, clearer, and hopefully it makes a lot of sense to folks. So what I've got here on the screen is a trip from looks like National Indoor RV Center near the Atlanta area to one of the AIM rallies happening in the fall, September in Angel Fire. I've been to Angel Fire. It's really a lovely resort. Getting there is fun at night, even so. I get there during the day if you can. But it's a beautiful resort. So you can see I've got a basic shell of a trip planned right here. Now, here's the caveat. I'm leaving. I'm from the standpoint of the owner of this RV, for example, is, let's say that September 1st they're leaving. Either their rig's going to be ready, being done from service, or they're taking it out of storage at that time. Whatever the case may be, they're leaving National Indoor on September 1st. However, the AIM rally is not until, don't quote me, September 18th or 19th or something like that. Um, so obviously it thinks I'm going to leave Atlanta here and show up in Angel Fire 1,400 miles away in 26 hours. Well, that's not going to happen, right? So what I need to do here is I have a specific place to be at a specific time, which is this AIM rally in Angel Fire. But obviously, getting there is more or less a fluid motion. It's a trip I haven't planned yet. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to lock in these dates. Now, without me Googling it, making sure I got it right, it's around the 18th or 19th. So I'm going to go in here. I'm not going to, obviously, I don't want to lock it now with the wrong date. So I'm just going to click on the little pencil icon here. And we're going to choose lock date of stay. Now, obviously, it's the wrong date shown right this minute. So the first thing that I see people doing, and when I look at that, I see as two dates. Right away, I'm thinking rental car, hotel, airline flight, where I've got to pick one and then pick the other, right? Even though that's true, it's sort of done in a single motion here. So I'm going to click virtually anywhere in this bar that it'll let me, right here, for example. And I can set my dates with just 2 clicks, okay? Um, you may not be able to name that song in 2 notes, but I can set my date in 2 clicks. I don't need to drag and drop and click multiple times and do all this. This is where the confusion lies. I don't need to choose a starting point, a start date, then go back into the menu and choose an end date. 2 simple clicks, right? Let's say we said this was on the 14th to the 18th. Done. And you can see my dates are correct, 9/14 to 9/18. It I didn't have to choose 2 separate instances like I might for a rental car or I might for a hotel room. It's 1 click. If I go back into that right now, you can see that those dates are currently highlighted. Now, suppose I made a mistake and I clicked on the wrong stuff. Well, my inclination is, of course, oh, I got to clear those dates somehow. No, you don't. Let's say, for the sake of example here, that I misspoke and the rally is from the 6th to the 13th. Now it's not, but let's say it is, and we're going to change that. I don't need to clear. I don't need to click multiple date range. I don't need to do anything. Again, 2 clicks, 6 to 13, and it's done. It sets the date range. It closes the little calendar window, and it's fixed. And then I find out, oh, I read it wrong. You're right. It is indeed from 13, I'd say 14 to 18. Boom. 2 clicks. That's it. That little nuance has proven to be really confusing for folks. Um, and we might come back to that, but let's move on a little bit. And if I go ahead and hit save here, we're going to see that the best feature we have right here, which now it shows me, hey, when I leave National Indoor with my RV on 9/1, I've got 13 nights to burn before I get to Angel Fire. This is the ideal original sort of plan or use case behind locked dates. Now, what I see too many times is folks get into a planning stage here, and their first inclination is to add a trip or add a stop, lock the date, add a stop, lock the date. That's usually unnecessary, um, and it's also can back you into a bit of a corner when you suddenly have no nights free. And I'm going to attempt to simulate that here, but um, we'll see how that goes. But this is really the use case: is to have a target that's fixed, and then work towards that target. Now, some folks are checking the lock date to sort of signify they have a reservation. And there's a different way to do that that's less caustic, and I'll show you that. But let's add a couple of stops here, just build this out a little bit and see how this works out. So you can see, as we've discussed in previous videos, this driving radius shows me where I'm going to be at the end of my driving day. And so I'm going to turn on my campgrounds. I have no filters engaged right now. And I'm going to look for a RV park or campground that is, again, as we've talked about, where my route and my driving radius intersect. That's where I want to camp, right? We'll just briefly touch on this. You can see that I have my driving settings set for advanced radius, 5 hours a day, at an average speed of 55 miles an hour. This is an overall average. So I know from experience this is exactly where I want to be. I don't want to drive less than this. I don't want to drive more than this. This is where I want to end up. And so now I just try to find a campground that is as close to that radius as possible. Now, we're not going to be overly selective here. Obviously, something with 0 amenities probably isn't in my wheelhouse right now. But I'm going to try to find just something we can grab. And this is a case where I can see, look, I've got a scale down here. You might be able to see that down at the bottom where my mouse is. It's 10 miles. And I can see that this is a little farther than I want to drive. But for the sake of getting a campground that has all the amenities I want, I'm willing to drive what looks to be about an extra half hour, right? So I'm going to add this to my trip. And remember, I've got 13 nights to burn here. So I can be selective. I can drive less, I can drive more, or I can stay longer at varying places. So this looks like a lovely place. If you've been here, maybe you can let us know in the comment section. But I'm going to add this to my trip, and I'm going to go ahead and just use, we're going to say 3 nights here at this location. Um, and see how it goes. Now, I don't want to stay after my last stop. Of course, my last stop is Angel Fire. I want to stay after National Indoor. And so now if we get a quick look at my trip, I'll hide the campgrounds again briefly. First, of course, over here, you can see my driving radius has moved with me to my next campground. So it'll be able to show me where I need to find another campground next whenever I start driving again, which after this case is 3 days. And then you can see over here in the trip menu on the left that I now have 10 nights available, which makes perfect sense, of course, because I had 13 and I just spent 3 nights, right? And so I can gauge my drive and say, all right, that wasn't bad. You know what? And I might, so here's a great instance of I might come back as I rough this plan out, and I might come back and say, you know what? I think we should stay 5 nights at Barnes Crossing instead of 3. At this stage in the planning, I don't know that yet. So what's the thing I don't want to do right now? Well, I don't want to go lock that date, right? I don't want to click on this lock. Now I get this lock right here. Well, now I've kind of pigeonholed myself into that. Well, it's not time for that. It's too early in the planning for that. Um, I could potentially lock that if I wanted to after I had already made reservations. But even then, it's somewhat unnecessary because I can go to my pencil icon. I can just put a reservation confirmation number in here. And then I'll see with this little calendar icon right here under the nights that I have a reservation. It doesn't mean I can't lock that. But again, at this point, I wouldn't be making reservations this early. It's still in the planning stage, right? So we're not going to have a reservation number. We're just going to get this thing roughed out. And I'll show you why. We'll do some date locking in a little bit, and I'll show you what can happen here. So let's just find another campground. We got to build this trip out real quick. And let's turn on the campgrounds again. And we could stay at a nice Corps of Engineers here if we wanted to. Not a lot there. No big rigs. We don't want to overdo this thing, but here's something off to the side. No Wi-Fi, but it holds big rigs. So or we'll even do a little bit less than that. What do we got here on the route? Okay, sure. We'll treat this like a one-nighter. We're not going to stay anywhere fancy. We just want to make a little bit of a shorter day and get out of Dodge, really, right? So we'll look at our entire trip again, and we'll see that my driving radius has moved, and now I'm on to the next section. Let's see what we can find here. All right, so here we're up near Oklahoma City. So this might be a case where, okay, we're going to stay a little bit longer. We're going to do some things in Oklahoma City. Maybe we're going to go to the Choctaw Casino or something. I don't know, but we'll grab this KOA. I'm going to add it to my trip. We're going to stay 5 days in lovely Oklahoma City. And we'll add that to my trip. So now we've got a couple of things we can look at here. I'm going to turn off my campgrounds and show my entire trip again. And we see that I've got 4 nights available because I burned 1 night at Trails End, and then I burned 5 days in Oklahoma City. Maybe you've got business there. Maybe we do whatever. One of those things where when you're near a big city, go to the vet, go to the doctor, stock up on groceries, whatever the heck it is you want to do. But now I've got 4 nights to get to Angel Fire, and Angel Fire is a 10-hour drive. So that's 2 days driving for me. And so we need to fill in again. So let's come in here and find us another campground to continue our journey. So now we're in Amarillo here, and we know from experience that we'll stay at the Oasis RV Resort. We're going to add that to my trip, and we're going to stay 3 nights. And now we're going to look at our entire trip again. And so now I can get to Angel Fire the next day. Okay. So I've got a couple of decisions to make here. I still have a night available, and Angel Fire is a full day away. It's 300 miles. It's from Amarillo here. It's 5.5 hours. Now, if I haven't ever been there before, I might say, well, let's just push that and do it, right? But I have been there before, and I remember distinctly that the drive coming in through some of these roads here, right here through 64, sorry, you know, I just maybe don't want to be doing that at the end of the day, right? So I might instead here, knowing I have a night available, I happen to know there's a couple of places here in Raton. I've stayed at the KOA in Raton. Let's add that to my trip. One night after Oasis. And now that way my next day will just be a little over hour, hour and a half. I can take my time. So, and you see here on the left now that the number of nights I have available is no longer, what am I trying to say? The number of nights I have available is gone. That little warning is gone. I've properly filled my nights. Now, while I still have a chance here, I could begin making reservations, trying to fill in these night, essentially book all these accommodations. What I might find is, for example, crossing at Barnes maybe only has 2 nights available. So I might have to stay 2 nights here, or maybe I stay 6 nights in Oklahoma City, or perhaps Oasis only has 2, so I stay an extra day. The point is, I work my way through my list and polish off and finish off those reservations and get them all booked and get my trip solidified, because I might still have to make changes. If I lock all these dates down, which I'll do right now, we'll lock these all down. Okay, all of my dates are locked, and now I start making phone calls, and I find out that I need to stay in Oklahoma City. Let's say that I need an extra night here. I'm trying to just think of this on the fly, but let's say can't let's start here. I make my first phone call. Barnes says, "Oh, no, it's you got to stay 4 nights. It's part of our deal, or it's a holiday weekend or whatever, right?" So I'm like, "Okay, sure, I'll stay 4 nights." So I go in here and I change. You can see, look, it's locked. So now I can try to. I don't have any nights left, is what I'm trying to get at. Even when I unlock this, I have no more nights available. I have no more flexibility. And so this is where you just don't want to get too knee jerk about locking these dates. It's once my trip is solidified and I'm not making any more changes, I could potentially lock those if I want to. But then again, if I'm not doing anything else with the trip, I kind of don't need to lock. Um, I think a lot of us are a little bit mixed on how this feature should be used, but the way that I just demonstrated it, where I to use it as an aid to help you. The idea is it helps you not have to do math, which I'm a really big fan of, not having to do math. And I don't have to sit here and go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 6 days. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 3 days. I don't have to do any of that. I just lock my final destination because that's solidified. The rally perhaps has been paid for months in advance, and those dates are firm. They are not changing no matter what happens. Whereas my journey to get there is going to change until I lock it all down. So I don't really feel the need to use locking features except for that final destination, and it counts down those number of available nights. So that's the real intent and the real use case of how that date locking was originally intended. And then just to reiterate here, the act of locking and unlocking or setting these dates is less complicated than you think it is. It's almost too easy, in a sense that it's 2 clicks once you get into the window, versus again hotel or a car reservation or an airline flight where I have to pick a start and do it, pick a stop and do it, or return. It's more like pick up and return. Here, it's one click to get into the calendar module and then 2 clicks to set my date. Now, you can do it across months. If this was, for example, September 22nd through August 5th or something like that, I click the 22nd, I arrow over, click the 5th, done. That's it. 2 clicks. 2 clicks. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to erase. You don't have to clear. You don't have to click start. You don't have to click end. It's just open the calendar and 2 clicks. That's it. And I'll put this back to wherever it was, 13 to 18. It's so simple. See? I So this is a great example. I love this so much that I actually accidentally did it. So you remember when I first chose this, I chose the 14th through the 18th. And I kind of mumbled and fumbled about whether it was the 13th or the 14th. And I said, well, I'll just pick the 14th. Well, just here, I just tried to click the 13th. And I got that big orange banner that said, no, there's not enough nights. You can't pick the 13th because that's already dealt with, accounted for. So it's a real great eye opener to keep you on schedule. So now we go 14 through 18. And again, my initial thought is to go fix the start date, but that's not how it works. It's always just 2 clicks. So if I needed to fix, if I was on 13 and 18, as you can see I am, when I need to fix that, it's just 2 clicks. 14, 18, done. So, I don't think we could make it any simpler than that. I do get why it's different and confusing in a sense of it's not like we do in other areas. But when you're developing something that a lot of folks might be using on a touch screen or even a phone, we want it to be as simple, like our tablet like that. We want it to be as simple as possible. So that is going to be the segment for locked dates. And we're going to move on to something new. I say Jesus's comment. How there? Hi there, by the way. 5 nights. I'm not sure necessarily what that's in reference to. Obviously, we have the 5 nights in Oklahoma here. Angel Fire, we could extend it to 5 nights if that were the case. So, but we're going to move on now to a quick trip that I've got here, Mayflower to Moscow. It's not what you think. If you're in the Arkansas area, this makes sense to you. So this was a question that came through this week, and we got I think it was an email from the help desk, and somebody had a trip similar to this. And we looked at it and said, "Hey, I have this RV safe route from A to B, in this case Mayflower to Moscow, Arkansas, and look, there's all these 10-foot bridges on it. When I set my rig to 13 feet or whatever, why are there 10-foot bridges on my route?" And of course, the answer is there aren't. Not only is this partially a freeway here, but RV Trip Wizard is routing you around that. The secret is, and we say this frequently, but sometimes we just need to see it again. Zoom in, okay? If I look at this, I see all these 10-foot concerns. Let's just zoom in, and now we can see that these are older side bridges, railroad bridges, side roads, whatever they may be, that are nowhere near our route. Now look, it's good to know about them. If you had planned on pulling off your route without planning it and essentially without telling Trip Wizard, you just decided, hey, we better pull off and go check out MacArthur Park, you might want to know where some bridges and things might be. But when I'm looking at this trip, those are nowhere near my route. Similarly, here near Pine Bluff, we can zoom in and see once again that this low clearance is nowhere near my route. We've talked about this before. We've talked about zooming in to validate or verify your drag routes as well. and we've covered this a lot because it's fairly important. When you use the drag route feature and you kind of drop that baby on the map somewhere, you've got to zoom into your route closely. And we covered it pretty heavily last week and maybe even the week before. You've got to cover that and make sure you didn't drag yourself into a field somewhere. Um, it's an RV safe field. There's no overpasses in that field, but you don't want to be driving through it. So you want to verify that stuff by zooming in. So that came up this week. I wanted to just touch base on it. And let's see. So let's look at a comment here. Let's look at Caroline's comment. When I drag a route on a trip, it shows its waypoints. There's a way not to have it shows waypoint. Also, when I click no highways, Trip Wizard takes all highways. I just don't want to drive interstates. Distinguish from the trip. Okay, so a couple of things. With regard to this first question, dragging a route creates waypoints. The short answer is if you use the drag route feature, then no, there's no way to prevent waypoints. They are going to be there. It's how the map knows you're deviating from a route. Now, however, there's an alternative to waypoints, which is custom stops. So for example, let's say we wanted to swing by Sheridan on our way towards Pine Bluff because there's a fruit stand or a largest rocking chair or something in Sheridan. I don't know. I don't know what's in Sheridan. But let's say there's a reason we want to swing through Sheridan. We don't want to take the 530 all the way down. And I could drag the route as we've discussed and shown, but in this case, I could simply use a custom stop. So what I can do there is I can zoom in, and my inclination here would be to zoom in on probably the 167, get up close, right click and create a custom stop after Mayflower and save. And now if you look at our route, oops, sorry, a little zoom happy there. You can see it did exactly as we planned. Now, it's still an RV safe route because Trip Wizard simply treated it like another stop. That custom stop that I chose could have been no different than a gas station or a campground or a restaurant or whatever. It's okay, I'll give you a new route. We could still vet this out with satellite view and street view and just, kind of know what we're getting into. But as you can see here, there are no waypoints created. It just creates a custom stop. And what we might do, it says Grant, Arkansas, but maybe we wanted to, it says it's near Grant, Arkansas, right? Let's just say we just decided to call this the Sheridan leg of our journey, right? And so now I look at, oh yeah, Sheridan leg, or I could just call it Sheridan, or I call it fruit stand, or whatever reason I'm going to Sheridan. Could be to pick up somebody, right? Whatever. So that's one part of uh, answer to Carolyn's question. And again, the waypoints are there as part of the drag route. There's really two reasons for the waypoint, and let's just talk about it real briefly. If I try to drag this, which I should be able to do, drag route. Okay, I'm going to let go. You can see over on the left, it creates a waypoint. So not only does this marker, now this is going to be good. So not only does this marker serve its function to reroute my route, it also provides me a way to delete this not custom stop, to delete this drag function if I did it poorly, because I can click this little trash can. Now it looks like I created a route exactly like I did with the custom stop, right? But if we zoom in on this, look what I've done. I've actually got myself coming off the 167, coming down this janky little side road and getting back on. Why is that? Because I created a drag route and just let it go at 30,000 feet. And there's more dexterity down at that level. There's more roads. There's more. It can't tell from where I'm dropping it that's where I want to go. So if I really wanted to stick with the drag route, I zoom in, realize my mistake. I delete the little trash can, Then I come back and I try it again, but this time I'm going to zoom in a little closer when I do the dragging. So we're going to try it again, and we're going to just take our time, pause, make sure it looks good, and let go of the mouse. And then as I zoom in, you can see I, in fact, did properly drag that route. Um, so that's that. Let's look at the rest of Carolyn's comment. When I click no highways, I just don't, yeah. So is there a way to distinguish that within the trip setting, routing area, another? Okay, so this is another great question, Carolyn. What Carolyn is saying here is, let's delete this waypoint, is if we turn off no highways, which we'll try this and we'll see what it gets us. Routing and driving, avoid highways. Okay, so we can see here where it took us off the interstate, and it's taken us down some side roads and things like that. Uh, that's not a bad segment. This one actually turned out pretty well. But one of the things that can happen is Carolyn's point is she doesn't want to avoid highways. She just wants to avoid interstates. If we open this trip, let's go back to our AIM rally and see what kind of example we get here. This should be a little bit more interesting. So if we look at our whole trip here, if we avoid highways here, and of course, it's even going to tell us there's some areas we can't even get there without a highway. And of course, you can see this is a really convoluted, messed up sort of a route because we're trying to be very literal about avoiding highways. What we don't have yet is the ability to do that by segment. In other words, saying, look, I'm perfectly happy taking the freeway or the interstate till I get, I mean, look at the route this thing is taking. It's disastrous. I'm perfectly happy taking the interstate for a certain amount of my route, but on other parts, I prefer to take side roads and things like that. So the avoid highways is a little bit baby with the bathwater, kind of just overly zealous feature. If we turn this back to a normal trip here again, yeah, boy, it added 600 miles doing that, by the way. Let's say, for example, as we get into here, I'm trying to find a good spot where you might want to get off the highway, get off the interstate and take some other road. And not knowing the area all that well, I don't know what that might be. But let's say this might, well, that's some areas there just aren't a whole lot of other good options, but this would be a good option here. Let's say you don't want to take I-40 from Oklahoma City to Amarillo. You'd much prefer to go through some of these small towns, take your time, that sort of thing, right? If I turn on avoid highways, we already saw kind of the train wreck that caused. But what I could do here is create those drag routes with waypoints or custom stops. So for example, I could get off the freeway by simply and take this right here where it tends to turn south on 40. I could say, you know what? I actually want to cut across here and see some scenery. And so what I might do is create a custom stop here heading into Pampa. And whoops. So I'm going to go here. We're going to right click, create a custom stop. This is after Oklahoma City. And now we can see what it did for us. And it did, in fact, do what we wanted. Now, in this case, it's going to try to get us back down on the freeway to continue our journey, the most efficient route as we get to the Amarillo at the oasis that we've chosen for our stop. We could, in fact, if we wanted to avoid, whoops, I just did a drag route. That's one thing. Always turn your drag route button off, or you end up creating an inadvertent drag route like I just did. So I just turned that off. Now, we might look at this and say, well, I don't want to go here. I want to come down 60 and go through Amarillo. Um, you might, I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but if you did, here's the business loop. Once again, I could create a custom stop, kind of force my way in to create this route. I think it was that. And now you can see I've eliminated that little juke down to the 40, and now I kind of at some point I've got to get back to the 40. That's as good a place as any. So you can see I've kind of coerced that route to stay off of this big stretch of I-40. And similarly, I could do the same thing here. You know, I could come up and make a custom stop here at Watonga and cut across the 47 down here to the 33. You can manipulate the route however it suits your fancy. Obviously, in this case, I would manipulate that route before I booked and solidified all my campgrounds because that's going to add a lot of time to your drive. It's going to change where you might want to sleep. And so you might, for this trip, I might have, rather than creating any stops at all, if I really had segments, any campgrounds, if I really had segments that I wanted to take the countryside route, I might do those first. And that way, when my driving radius shows me where I am in 6 hours, it's going to be significantly more accurate. We might be able to see that here. Let's go to the KOA now. And we can see, yeah, it didn't change our route a whole lot here. Certain areas will, I mean, it's going to be a little bit slower going on side roads and things. But anyway, that's between the custom stops and the drag routes is a way to. The other thing we could, let me just interject here, interrupt my own self here. Instead of just creating a spot in the road, I could use restaurants, grocery stores, fuel stops, scenic, like a point of interest. If I don't know if I have any point of interest, but other reasons to have a stop other than just creating a marker in the road. Perhaps there's a farmer's market in Pampa, or a restaurant, a little mom and pop diner, whatever the case may be. I don't have to just use a marker in the side of the road. I can use anything as a custom stop, or even it might not even treat it as a custom stop, right? We could find a Walmart that we want to stock up on, or whatever, and use that to direct our route. It doesn't always have to be dragging and custom stops. We can use properties and locations, a campground. We might decide, look, instead of staying at Oasis, right, let's keep ourselves off the main drag and stay here instead, which is, let's try to find something that has some amenities. Here we go. This little guy right here. Let's add this to our trip. How many nights we have in Oasis? 3. Let's add this to our trip. 3 nights after Oasis. Of course, I don't have enough nights, which we've figured that out already. So we're going to delete Oasis. And now we're going to add this in for 3 nights. And this is after this Amarillo little sidebar there. And now we can see, and actually I can eliminate that Amarillo stop now. And now we are off the freeway from the point we get past Elk City into Sayre. We are now off the freeway all the way to Raton. And obviously, again, this could potentially change your driving time and things like that. I don't really even probably need this gray stop here anymore in Pampa, because the route's going to naturally take me that way. So now I've coerced this route in a way, whether I haven't used any custom stops or any route dragging, by simply choosing a campground that was in that direction. So lots of nuance, lots of possibilities, there's just a ton of ways to plan and manipulate the trip. And looking at this is all still well within my driving range, you know? And of course, these are things you kind of know before you plan. You might know, look, I'm going to avoid the main drag. I'm going to avoid the freeways and things like that. So you sort of already plan in that with that mentality, whereas I kind of just picked a bunch of campgrounds. So, all right, let's see if we got any other questions. Let's see what Kelly says. Why must I know select? So why must I select alternate route when clicking my GPS? Okay, why must I know select alternate route when clicking on my GPS, even though actual trip shows I can't use it? Kelly, I'm sorry, I don't totally understand that question. I will say this, when you navigate a trip in RV Trip Wizard, you should always simply choose match route exactly. And that way you're going to take the route that you spent all this time carefully vetting and planning. You're going to take the route exactly. I can show you that real quick. Let's go to, let me change my screen and we will share the phone. Okay. So we've been looking at this AIM rally trip. So if I go to my trips, I'll pull down, make sure it's refreshed, go to the AIM rally, and we can see it's already reflected our changes, right? Here's that urban hidden. Um, if I go to navigate that, let's just pick, of course, I'm doing it from here, but let's just pick that. I'm always going to want to choose match planned trip route exactly. Um, we talked about this before, and I wouldn't want to leave anything to chance as to what the allow changes might do to my route. It'll be RV safe, but it could potentially pick a completely different segment um, to get me from point A to point B. I'm not sure why I would ever want to do that if I've taken all this time to plan my route exactly. And if I choose plan my route exactly, it doesn't even give me any options. I can't change the options I've chosen in this because it's routing me exactly the way I chose it in Trip Wizard. So now, of course, this is going to hang because I'm not anywhere near Oklahoma City. Uh, you know, it's trying to follow my trip, and my trip doesn't include a stop in Dallas, so it doesn't. It's going to build it. It's going to try to get me back on the route. Essentially, is what it's doing. We'll see if that finishes. So let's go back to Trip Wizard then. So if I want to share the whole window. Yeah, here we go. And it did finally finish building that trip, and it's going to take me 6 hours, 5.5 hours to get from DFW to Oklahoma City, based on the specs that I use for my RV. So that did fine. So let me go back to that. Let's see what my GPS will not allow exact. I was told to select. I want to use exact. So I think this. So Kelly, I think what you must have an Android phone is my assumption. There is and either is or was or is in the process of being worked on some sort of an Android bug that's preventing the follow route exactly. You may be getting the no endpoint error or something like that. This is something that we've seen on some flavors of Android. The problem with Android simply is let's see what she's got here. The problem with Android is there's so many flavors of OS and phones that you can have a problem, and it's tougher to figure out than Apple, which is far more rigid. But that's my assumption, Kelly, is that you're still fighting that Android issue. Um, she has an iPhone. Okay, so I'm full of stuff at that point. So I don't know. Kelly says she has spent a bunch of time with our folks. Look, they're the experts on it. Whatever issue you're having, I've got an iPhone. I have not ever run across that. Obviously, we've got a ton of folks using it, but I don't know why yours is failing. It may be that our support team is researching it. Uh, I simply don't know. I don't have insight to all that they have going on. There's a lot more smarter folks working on that type of stuff behind the scenes. All I can say, Kelly, is I hope that that gets resolved for you. It is the far and away the match route exactly is the ideal scenario because you're matching a trip that you spent a great deal of time planning. So hopefully they'll get that figured out for you. Um, we talked about locked dates. We talked about the low clearances. Let's touch base real quick on searching. This shouldn't take very long, but I ran across this again the other day, and it's TripWizard can find virtually anything you can throw at it. The problem we have is people will, and I'm guilty of it as well, we just type too darn fast and we make assumptions. Um, and I'll use I should be able to use the same example. If I type in Oasis, okay, the first thing it's always, anything you search for is always going to first search for campgrounds, which it does. Then it's going to search for other places of interest that have that name in this case. And it's also going to try to do it within somewhat of the realm of my map's viewpoint. So for example, and let me I won't turn it off right now. If I type Oasis with 6 states in my purview here, I'm getting results from Texas, New Mexico, um, and of course the parks kind of just work their way down the list. But we see that we have an Oasis RV resort, and then there's Oasis campground. So if I'm zoomed in here on Amarillo, let me not zoom in too much, and I type in, and I just think, oh, let's stay at that Oasis campground in Amarillo, right? So I type in Oasis Cam, and I get that far. And I now in my list of parks, it's not there. I see the Oasis campground, but suddenly the Oasis RV resort is not there. Fortunately, we happen to find it down here under places of interest. But this is an example. And as I type campground, you can see it starts to push that down farther down the list. If I get enough in there, it's not going to show up. Plus, I'm also zoomed in. Now, the beauty of this is this works really well. If I'm staying near Amarillo and I want to find, say, a wine place, right? Maybe not so much a liquor store, but like a wine tasting or something like that. I zoom in on Amarillo, I can type wine, and I get a parks. I don't know what a wine baseball is, but maybe there's nothing about wine in Amarillo. It's Texas. Let's look for a brewery. And here you go. 6 Car Pub and Brewery, Amarillo, Texas. So the search functionality is amazing. It's not only thorough, but it's location aware. If I typed, I typed in brewery, and I only get a couple I zoomed out a little bit, right? So now I get a couple more, Poncetta, Red Door. Well, there's a million breweries in this country, right? Why don't I see those? Because I'm zoomed in on Amarillo. If I zoom out a bunch more, that list is gonna end up growing if I refresh it. So the point is, the search tool is very, very helpful for finding parks, finding campgrounds, finding places of interest that you need to find. But don't over type. Type just what you need to get your message across. There's a Plantation RV Resort, right? I can type in Plantation. I don't need to type any more than that. Now, of course, I'm zoomed over the entire country, so it's like, well, wouldn't hurt to spell it right either. Plantation. There we go. So now I've got all these campgrounds, and then of course I have places of interest. And the more I zoom in, the more I move, the more I focus, the more focused that search engine is. So it's a wonderful, marvelous thing, and folks forget about it. And I just want to bring that to attention again, mainly because it came up in a support conversation this week. Um, okay, the last thing I have officially today is what? Oh, default settings. Yeah. So we're all kind of gotten used to the new menu now, right? We all know that when I have this aim rally trip, I can click on my wrench icon and I can go to my trip settings. And here are my settings for this trip. Now, what we've seen happen, and we've actually seen it prior to the menu changes, when folks first get started on RV Trip Wizard, RV Life Trip Wizard, they either don't understand what the settings are for, maybe they haven't watched our settings overview video, which is fantastic video. So they kind of muddle through their default settings, put in a lot of wrong stuff. Well, when they finally figure out what's what and they create a trip, they go to the wrench and they tweak all those settings and they're real happy and their trip's great. But then they start a new trip and everything's wrong again. And that's because all new trips derive their settings from default settings. So we all want to just go in and correct and change and check our default settings. Where this topic actually came up was with regard to budgeting. I can go in my trip, for example, and see my expenses tab and see that I've got $50, and this is just budget numbers that I have plugged in, right? $50, nothing for meals because I got to eat anyway, whether I'm traveling or not. So I don't count meals. I don't really have any miscellaneous expenses that I can think of. And my average cost a gallon is $3. Now, this these settings were derived from my default settings, which we'll go look at in a moment. And what is the obvious glaring problem here? Well, if I'm taking this trip anytime soon, that $3 a gallon isn't going to cut it, right? So diesel's maybe $5 a gallon. So let's see what my dollars are for this trip right now. 14, no, no, 14.15 is my dollars. Interesting, 14.13 is my miles. But if I go change that fuel to reflect this trip and only this trip, let's say I put that at $5 a gallon. I think that's probably being generous. We can see that my trip just now jumped to $1,792. Now, I did not change my default settings. Now, at some point, perhaps, if gas and fuel never gets back to $3, I might want to go change that. So let's go look at our default settings. You click on your people icon at the top there, you see your name, you click on default settings. And of course, it tells us that the other settings were moved. We already knew about that. And you'll find that this is a little bit more the traditional view. This matches the video we have exactly. But the settings are all basically the same thing here. For general, you really hardly ever have to touch that. The only thing I turn off, well, there's two changes in here that I always make. I do not want my last trip auto loaded. I want to be able to choose the trip when I come in. This is because I'm working with dozens of trips and samples and demos and things like that. I don't really want that. You might be working on one trip and you always want it to load. That's fine. And I always choose click for stop details rather than hover. This could be an important point for you that are for those of you that are using it on an iPad or something where you can't hover, right? You got to tap for stuff to happen. So it might be something to look at for you. RV info, of course, is you just want to make sure that you've put in the right info. I manually put my info in. I can look mine up, but I think I've just always manually put it in, so I just have it that way. 12'7", 43 feet long, 36.5 is what we weigh out when fully loaded. My rig can hold more than that, but that's what we always end up weighing out at. And I am not carrying propane, I'm all electric. Diesel fuel, 100 gallons. I keep 30 in reserve. Remember, motor homeowners usually want to keep a quarter of a tank in reserve. So for me, that's 25. I put mine to 5 more than that, so 30. And fuel economy is 7.5. It's probably 8, but because I'm all electric, I'm burning fuel in other areas, such as with my generator or with my aqua-hot, so I put 7.5. And I want multiple fuel stops. Routing and driving, again, we've covered multiple ways in these videos. I generally just have avoid unpaved roads. As we looked before, I had actually changed my average driving speed for that demo. My average driving speed I actually use now is 60 because I tend to take shorter trips without stopping. And so my average speed's gone up just a tad. I use the advanced driving radius and 4 hours a day. I don't use the miles at all. And my expenses. Here's where I have that $50 and that $3. Maybe for a while, I turn that to $4. Maybe it'll go back to three, maybe it won't, but I can save. And that way I can be assured. Well, the most important feature, and go back into that, the most important part of this, if I can find it. Interesting. And of course, we're using RV safe routing, which it looks like is now the default. So when I look at my current trip, I can manipulate this current trip without, you see here, RV routing is the standard, and you're not even allowed to change that default anymore. It is going to default to RV routing. Why would I want standard routing? I can't think of a good reason, frankly. Not with the RV size I have, why I would want that option. One potential use case for folks is, say you have a big fifth wheel and you haul it down to Florida, and you leave it there and you head back up to, maybe winter in Florida, and you take just your truck back to the Northeast to winter out, and your RV sits in Florida either on a lot or in storage or on an RV site or whatever. So you might want to use a standard routing on the way back, but no, we're not. We you're There's no reason to ever really change this from RV routing. So anyway, all of that to say that if I want to change the criteria on this trip, I can change my speed, I can change my fuel if I wanted. Maybe you're renting an RV for a trip for a particular use case and you want to just, yeah, we're not taking our big rig, we're renting a small class C. Okay, fine. You could change those settings, change the fuel, change your average driving time. Maybe you're taking a trip with grandkids. So now you're stopping more frequently and you're changing your hours, you're changing your speed, you're dropping those lower. Um, Maybe you're creating a trip that is just literally a sprint to get from A to B for an event, and you're just staying one nighters, pull throughs only, and you're just banging out that trip. You're going to change your average drive time, your average speed, any of those types of things. So, all of that can be changed, but everything starts, every new trip starts with what you have set in those default settings. So, it's important to make sure those are correct. Um, okay. So with that said, and we kind of rushed into this today to get into the lock dates, particularly because we want to potentially snip out that segment as some sort of like a training video for lock dates. I may see if I can sort of segregate that piece out. So we kind of went all over all the breezed past all the niceties, such as um, you're watching this either on the RV Life YouTube channel or the RV Life Facebook page. Throughout the busy part of the year here, certainly into June, July, we'll try to do this every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Um, we'll see what happens after that, see what the audience needs, and we'll see what our support team feels like the words that need to get out. Be sure and subscribe to the RV Life YouTube channel so you're reminded of these. We are working on getting an email out to new RV Life users, but um, there's always issues getting in the way of that. So if you subscribe to the RV Life YouTube channel, you won't miss out on these. You won't miss out on the new training videos. I want to remind folks watching that if you go to help, let's make sure I'm showing that screen. Yeah. If you go to help and you go to video support down here in the red button, ignore the video tab, come down to video support. This will take you to the RV Life Trip Wizard YouTube channel. You can see our brand new Creating Your First Trip video that just went up a week or so ago. We've got all of our other product training videos across the top here. That settings overview we talked about is right here as well. It's the next video. And we've got a variety of some of the older speed training classes that, for example, this fuel video is, from an interface perspective, is slightly out of date, but the message is really clear and still very valid, very valuable. And a little bit farther down, we've got some videos created by popular content creators that are partners with ours that have done a great job creating video. So that's a reminder. Anyway, the point of that is we show the training videos you see here. We are showing on the RV Life YouTube channel. Let's jump to that quickly. And this is where the live streams that you're seeing now are actually shown and where they're housed. Here's all the past ones, but you can see we mirror these product training videos. And so by subscribing to that RV Life YouTube channel, you will be alerted of these. So we'll do this again every Wednesday at 11 until, let's see what Jamie has to say here. Yeah, this is actually a pretty good comment. So we talked about why would you want to use standard routing. You can use RV Life Trip Wizard as a GPS, just like you would Google or anything else. But if you set it to standard routing, you could potentially become familiar with how it feels and operates and sounds and that type of thing. So that's a nice use case for that. And again, I don't know that we do it a whole lot, but that's actually a pretty good way to get used to the GPS by testing it without being routed, in an odd way in your car. Um, so there's that. Okay, I don't have anything else this week. I think we've covered all. I think we've got all the questions, Kelly. I wish you the best on our folks getting that oddity figured out for you. Carolyn, I hope we answered all your questions. Jesus, good to see you online, my friend. And Jamie, of course, good to hear from you. That's it. We will move on, and next week we'll do the same time, and we'll have more interesting and exciting RV Life Trip Wizard topics for you. Until then, thank you.